Hi everyone, today I'm going to be showing you how I made this dried flower wreath with all flowers that we grew in our cut flower garden this year. This is a perfect wreath for summer and I think it will even go really well into fall. So first let's take a look at the flowers that I'm going to be using. All of these flowers are already dried by hanging them upside down in small bunches in a dark place. And this usually takes about a week or two depending on the conditions that you're drying your flowers in. The first thing I have is this Sweet Annie, which has these tiny little yellow flowers. This one is great to use almost like a foliage flower for the wreath. Then I have some yarrow. I have white yarrow and also some of that Colorado mix, which has all different kinds of colors, but they do dry a little bit more muted. These really bright yellow and purple flowers are Status. These ones keep their color really well, but I think I'll only be using the yellow ones because the purple doesn't really go with the palette that I'm going for today. Next we have Gomphrena, and these ones keep their color so well. I have this red variety, which I think is perfect for this summer and fall color palette. Those really produce really well, so I have a lot of those. And the other really main focal flower that I'm going to be using for a lot of this wreath is straw flowers, another one that keeps their vibrant color super well. And I really love the mix that I grew this year that had all of these beautiful, vibrant colors, and these are going to be the main pop of color in this wreath. I have another small bunch of Sweet Annie, but these ones I picked before those yellow flowers formed, so it has a little bit of a different look to it. I have just a few stems of this celosia, which is hot pink, and these are really nice because they're super soft. A lot of these dry flowers are actually pretty like pokey. These ones are nice because they feel almost like feathers. Another almost type of foliage for the filler are going to be these different grasses. I have mostly frosted explosion grass here, but I also have a couple of just like normal weed grasses that formed seed heads. And then I have a few stems of goldenrod as well. These just started producing at the back of our property. I don't grow this in our flower garden. It kind of just grows wild in our area, and I thought the color would be perfect for this. So that's pretty much all of the different flowers I have. Now I just have to separate all of these bunches out and make different piles with the different types of flowers. That way everything is all nicely organized and it's going to make the next step a lot easier. Here's a look at some of the piles. We have our beautiful vibrant straw flowers here, and I have a lot of those. Then we have the goldenrod, the celosia, just a few stems of those. Another big bunch is this Gomphrena, and then I also found just a couple of stems of Dara. These have like a dark purple muted color that I think will complement the brighter colors really well. We have our different Sweet Annie piles, the ones without the flowers and the ones with the flowers. I really like the ones that have those little yellow buds on them. And then here we have our different grasses, the frosted explosion, and here's a closer look at that like weed grass that I found on our property. If you have an area where your grass grows really long, you can probably find some of this. And then we have our different yarrow blooms that look really nice and vintage. The color does fade quite a bit on these when you dry them, but I still think that they look really cool. And then finally our Status, and again I'm just going to be using the yellow one for this project. Some of the other materials we're going to use today are a wreath form. This is one that I actually made myself with some branches from our willow tree. These are also really easy to make if you have like a grapevine that you're pruning. If you want to know how I made this wreath form, just leave a comment and I'll maybe do a video of that in the future. But you can also just buy this at a craft store if you don't want to or can't make your own. Next we have some 26 gauge floral wire. This is probably what's more standard to make this, but I'm actually going to use some thin jute twine instead. That way when I'm done with my wreath, if I have to toss it, then I can just throw the entire thing in my compost bin and I don't have to worry about fishing out all those pieces of wire. So the first step of this process is going to be putting together a bunch of tiny little bunches of our dried flowers. So I like to start off with one of the more foliage types of flowers, so the Sweet Annie or a grass, and then I'm just going to choose a few other different elements that I'm going to start layering. It's almost like making a mini bouquet or like a corsage, and you don't really have to be too particular about what goes in each bunch and the exact order, because in the end we're going to have a lot of different bunches and they're all going to kind of blend together. I would aim for maybe 5 or 6 different stems, and then once you have those all arranged in a way you like, you can just tie that off with either twine or the floral wire. I like to cut a small strip and wrap it around the bunch a couple of times, and make sure you do this pretty tightly so that it is nice and secure, and then just make a normal double knot at the end of it. And if your stems are really long, you can trim them down a little bit. I would aim for maybe 3 or 4 inches of stem underneath where your flowers begin, and that is our first bunch. Now you're just gonna do this lots of different times until you run out of flowers, basically. And in the end, I would say aim for at least 25 to 30 bunches for a wreath, and this will depend a little bit on how big your bunches are and how big your wreath is as well. So I'll just show you the process of making one more bunch. And again, it really doesn't matter what goes into each one. I'm mainly just trying to distribute my materials evenly. For example, I know I have a lot of straw flowers and a lot of gomphrena, but I don't have as many stems of goldenrod. So I'll try to do a couple of stems of straw flowers and gomphrena per bunch, but I will only do one bunch of goldenrod every 3 or 4 bunches. And that way I can kind of distribute my ingredients evenly. And I also like to do a mix of ones that have an element that sticks out, like a longer grass, and ones that are a little bit more compact. So I think that's going to be good for this bunch. I'm just going to go ahead and tie it up the same way that I did with the last one, and then trim off any of those stems that are a little long. So here are the first 2 bunches I made. You can see how they do look different because they each have different elements in them, and that is totally good. So I just went ahead and used up the rest of my flowers to make all of these beautiful bunches. Making these mini bunches is definitely the most time-consuming part of this process, but each one is really fun to make because they really are just like mini bouquets. You get to play around with different textures and colors and make a little work of art. That bucket only has half of my bunches. I have a lot of other ones. You're going to need a lot more bunches than you think you're going to need, and in fact I actually ran out and I didn't have enough to cover my entire wreath, but that's okay as well. You can see here how I try to have almost like a front and a back to each of the bunches because you're really only going to see one side as you lay them onto the wreath form, so just keep that in mind when you're putting these together. To start the wreath, you're going to take either your twine or your wire and wrap it around your wreath form. So since I'm using twine, I'm going to be tying a knot, but if you're using wire, you can just wrap this around a few times until it's secure. Then you're going to take one of your bunches and lay it at an angle on your wreath form facing outwards, kind of at like 45 degrees. Hold that in place with one hand and then start wrapping around it very tightly with your twine or wire. And I like to do this a few times at different points of the stem to make sure it's secure. And don't cut the wire or the twine. We're going to be using one continuous piece. You're going to take another bunch and lay that perpendicular to the first one. So if your first one was laid outwards from the wreath, the next one is going to lay towards the inside of the wreath. And try and cover up the stem of the previous little bunch so that you can't see it. Again, I'm just going to secure this with the twine at several points, wrapping it around multiple times so that that can stay in place. And you're just going to keep repeating these couple of steps. Just face the next bunch at a different angle from the previous one and try and cover up those stems, and keep wrapping and secure everything in place. A couple of things to keep in mind. The first one is to try and keep track of your bunches so that you can distribute your colors evenly if you have different kinds of flowers. For example, if you had mostly red flowers and you only had about 5 bunches that had yellow flowers, you wouldn't want all of those bunches to be the last ones that you put on so that there's only yellow on one side of your wreath. So just try and keep that in mind and organize your bunches accordingly. Another thing I like to try and do is make sure that if I have bunches that have a really long element, like those tall grasses, I try and face those on the outer edge of my wreath, because if you do too many bulky things on the inner edge of your wreath, the center is going to slowly disappear because your bunches are going to start taking up a few inches within that diameter. So try and leave that as open as possible and make your wreath go outwards. But other than that, you can do whatever you want with your wreath. Just have fun with this. This is probably the most fun part of the process because you get to showcase all of these beautiful flowers in whatever way you want. By the way, I did already mention all of the flowers that I'm using for my wreath that I think really work for this summer and fall color palette, but I just wanted to list off some other flowers that are really good for drying in case these are ones that you already have in your garden or things that you know you can grow really well. So we have amaranth, which would be really perfect for a fall wreath especially. There's also bupleurum, starflower, hydrangeas, roses and rose hips, bachelor's buttons, and of course a classic one, lavender. Another one that I've used in the past is echinacea. I don't dry them with the flower petals. I actually take the petals off and just use the center cone part of it. And you can also look and see if there are any really cool pods that form after flowers. For example, there are poppy pods or love in a mist pods. So hopefully this list gives you some ideas of different flowers that you can use for this if you're not growing the particular ones that I'm using today. When my wreath form was about 3/4 covered, I realized that I was not going to have enough bunches to cover the whole thing. So when I had 2 bunches left, I decided that I was just going to make this into a partial wreath. And the way I finish this off is just to turn one of those bunches the complete opposite way. And then I'm going to use the smaller of the last 2 bunches and try and fill in that gap that's remaining so that the flowers look continuous and that all of those stems are covered up. If you did have enough bunches to cover your entire wreath, you would pretty much do the same thing, and for the last one, turn it opposite so that you can fill in that gap and try and cover it up the same way that I did. But I'm actually okay that I didn't cover my whole wreath form because I really like the look of partial wreaths. And that's another great thing about using this natural willow wreath, because if some of it does show, it is a very beautiful wreath form to begin with, and it's totally okay if you see that. After wrapping around a couple times to secure this, I had just a few leftover random stems that I'm going to try and fill in this area because it looks a little flat. And I really want to add a little bit more volume to these emptier areas. After you're done, you can finally cut your twine or wire now and secure it by tying it around the back, or if you're using wire, just wrap it around a few more times. And for any final touches, I'm going to go in with a couple more loose stems and kind of just weave it in throughout the stems and form that are already there. I'm not even going to tie these in. And the wreath is finished. I really love how this wreath came out. It has so many vibrant colors that are so perfect for summer, and again, it's going to go really well into fall as well. I think it's really cool that we were able to grow so many of these flowers in our new cut flower garden, and maybe next year we'll be able to grow even more so that I'll have enough bunches to cover an entire wreath, because I think that would look really nice as well. But I do really love how this 3/4 wreath came out. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and maybe it inspired you to make your own flower wreath, or maybe just add some of these flowers to your grow list for next year. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you again in the next video.